of this committee, Councilmember Tom LaBonge. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And Councilmember Bill Rosendahl. How you doing, Bill?
Fantastic.
Excellent. I'm doing great. Thank you. All right.
If you want to move to the middle, if you feel that...
I like to be offset
Okay,
a little bit.
yeah,
It's more of a
That's up to you,
strategic...
Mr. Vice Chair.
it's-
If you
it's-
want me to move, I'll move to any of the chairs.
Come sit next to us. Don't be a stranger.
Which one?
Sit right here in the middle,
Okay.
where everybody can see you.
See, folks, I can move kind of quickly around here.
See, look at this.
The chair that puts it back.
All right. Now we only appear more organized.
You can watch Paul show up because he finished his meeting. Man.
Well, too late. All right. So, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and go through the consent calendar items, unless any of my colleagues have any questions on them, to let some of you fine folks get back to work. I was going to call items 1, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11 on consent. Unless I have cards. Let me just check to see if I have cards on any of those items.
Now, one is a closed session, yes?
One is a closed session, but unless you have questions for closed session, we can let our city attorneys go back to work. It was, I had read it, and it seemed...
But, I mean, are we going to talk about it in closed session?
No, we won't have a closed session unless you want to have a closed session. Unless you have very
You
specific
studied the
questions on
report,
that
you
one.
can see it.
I read the report. If you
I would like a closed session.
you want to have
on
a closed
this.
session
Yes.
on that one, you've got some questions. So we'll go ahead and continue to hold that item on the desk then for questions. And so for anybody's here on item 1, I'd ask that you stay here for that, and we'll take it first so we can knock it out pretty quick. There's one speaker card for public comments, and no other cards on items 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11. So that'll be the action of this committee, that those will go on consent. And we'll go ahead and start off with the public comment card. Phyllis Doherty.
Good afternoon, Phyllis Doherty, the Animal Issues Movement. I want to talk to you about dog licensing, which isn't getting done in the city, and the fact that we aren't really trying to do it. There's a tremendous amount of revenue that could and should be coming into this department. The county almost pays its entire budget on dog licensing. But you've got to do it smart. It has to be done through mail and electronic means. There are very simple templates already for doing it. Just talking to Bill Carter, the first time you mail it out to the people that are on the list, we already have the water and power list. You're going to get back about 30% statistically, automatically, because those people will just automatically respond. The second mailing is a second warning, and it goes not only to the tenant or the person that's occupying the property, it also goes with the assessor's list to the owner of the property, advising them that there may be a violation of state law taking place on their property if they have a dog there that is not vaccinated. Then you've cut this down to where that's when you bring your canvassers out, because then you have a small group of people left to deal with. To try to put 5 canvassers out here and canvass a city and say we're doing dog licensing is absolutely ridiculous. We're creating a public safety hazard because this is a rabies area, and there are a lot of rabies cases being reported now. So I'm going to beg you to make sure that Mrs. Barnett finally starts licensing and does it right, and that she reports back to you regularly on the gains that are being made, because the taxpayers should not have to be paying all of this money for animal control when there is a way that we can recoup it, and it's legal, it's not punitive, and it's good for the animal, it gets the animal home. It's nothing but a win-win for everyone.
Great. Thank you. We are also joined by the Honorable Council Member Paul Koretz. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Indeed.
How was your weekend?
Excellent.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. All right. With that, that will conclude public comment. We only had one public comment card, so we'll go ahead and close the public comment period. And we could, how many people are here on item 1? Two people.
This is a sewer line, and I think it's in my district.
No, I'm okay with
Yeah.
going over it.
I'm okay with their recommendation.
You're okay with the
You did, but
the
Mr.
recommendation,
Rosenthal
Mr. Rosendahl?
Sorry, what was that mumble about?
It was that this is in Mr. Labange's district. He's okay with the
It's a
recommendation.
sewer
We can
blockage
go ahead
issue.
and kick everybody else out of the room and go in consent if you had a, and go in.
Just want to get the city attorneys back to.
Which item is this?
This is item 1.
Oh, this is the closed session one.
Correct.
I do have questions. I want to ask questions.
It's a closed sewer.
So
I don't know what it is.
why don't we go ahead and do this? We'll hold that on the desk. We'll take closed session last, since most people are here on other items first, if you guys don't mind. Okay.
It will be
And,
fast. It's just that I got to hear it.
yeah, just easier than keeping everybody else here and kicking them out of the room and bringing them back. And so we'll go ahead and we'll hear it. And,
That's all.
and then, but we'll do it last. That's okay.
Perfect.
Okay. But it only brings us a couple more items. So, fantastic.
Okay, then we'll start with item 2, which is a motion, Buscaino, Kikorian relative requesting preference of a local manufacturer ordinance that would provide a preference to companies that manufacture in Los Angeles County when bidding on city contracts for goods. I think we have a representative from the city attorney.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Pete Echeverria from the City Attorney's Office. I noticed this motion as I was preparing for another item on your agenda today, but I'm familiar with the local preference program, and it does in fact provide a local preference for manufacturing if the company qualifies as a local business already, right? Whether or not it's a manufacturing or a service building or a service firm. So I'm not sure what the maker's intent is. It's already covered by the ordinance, as from what I read in his motion. If it's acceptable to the committee, I would ask for a one-week continuance so that I may have a discussion with him to see what it is that he's trying to address. Otherwise, I think the ordinance.
I move 1 week continuance, and also just, Mr. Chair, if you come back, if you go from City Hall and go to the county line, it's so many miles, but you go to the North County, I think we should do a radius, meaning it would be, let's say to Palmdale, it's 48 miles. So whatever's 48 miles, which may include Orange County or Southern California. We're all in it together. We're not separate by borders.
So the constraint that we have is that the charter authorizes a local preference for Los Angeles County or for the state,
For the state, not for the region.
one or the other. So
We're in Skag. Come back.
our local
in a week.
preference is
So
for the
what
county.
I was going to ask, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I actually have a couple other motions in front of me. If you can report back on these two together.
Certainly.
And it is motion 111673. That's 111673 S3, as well as council file number 11-167, just 1673. And then there was a 1673A as well. If those three can all come back together for a report back. And specifically, what we're looking at, and this had come up several times in the budget deliberations last year in those discussions on actually redefining local preference for the preferential treatment on the bids to be specifically city and not county. And then some of the questions that were never truly answered or opined by the city attorney's office relative to if that would necessitate a charter amendment.
It would.
Or not.
I can tell you
We've
that
never
for
gotten
now.
anything in writing,
Okay.
and so what we're asking for, because we've been told by different city attorneys that perhaps it could just simply be an administrative change. So if we can get
I'm
some of
happy to
that,
provide it in writing, but it would take a
and then a
charter
clear
amendment.
path to what it would take,
Certainly.
then. And so if that can all come back together within a week, is that a week reasonable?
I'll certainly have an oral report with respect to the other motion, that Mr. Buscaino's motion. With respect to the other, I might need an extra week to get your written report on everything.
Why don't we just hold the item for 2 weeks and bring it
That's
all
fine.
back together?
That's fine.
Take,
Thank you.
so we could just have a holistic approach.
All
Fantastic.
at once.
Thank you very much, Mr. Echeverria. All right.
Ready for item 4.
4.
Item 4 is a CEO report, Chief Legislative Analyst
Yeah,
report.
let's take 4 and 5 together, if we could, please.
Okay. And the city attorney reports and alternative fourth revised draft ordinance relative to establishing the citywide administrative citation enforcement program and the creation of a special fund entitled Code and Compliance Fund. Item 5 is Department of Animal Services report relative to the creation of an Animal Services administrative citation enforcement program. On February 5th, 2013, the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee approved as amended to request the city attorney to draft an ordinance that includes the Animal Services Department as part of a citywide ACE pilot program.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We have several speaker cards. Why don't we take those first? Mr. Jay Handel, Cindy Cleghorn, Jacob Miller. And one more, since we have 4 mics, and Phyllis Doherty. Going once? Going twice? Gone. Sorry, they missed their time. This is the Budget and Finance Committee. We got to stay on budget.
Sorry, guys.
It's all right.
Controller's office on the other line.
Sorry.
Administrative ACE
Did
program.
we have the other speakers? Are they in the hall? Can we? You want them to all come up if you could? Just
I
have a seat.
wouldn't know only because I'm here. Hi, guys. Sorry. ACE program. The budget advocates have looked at the ACE program as something that will benefit this city very much. We need to get the cops back on the street doing police work, and we don't have enough code enforcement people.
Can you
to
just state your name for the record?
Sorry, Jay Handel,
Thank
Chair of the Budget Advocates. We don't have enough. We don't have enough people out there doing what they need to do. We have animals that run around on the streets and dogs that bark, and instead of sending police and sending people, if we had the ACE program, this thing would actually work really well. I understand in the bigger picture. ACE has been a scary thing for people. Ooh, they're going to come after my house because I have big bushes or big trees or big fences, and that's something that bad behavior has happened over the course of decades and the city has done nothing about. We need to start going piece by piece fixing those broken windows, and Animal Services is a great place to start while everyone's trying to figure out what the ramifications are based on citations moving forward on other components. So we fully support, having ACE be implemented in the animal services part, but frankly, we also fully support moving forward with the ACE program in its entirety, fleshing out what departments it would be with, what the ramifications were. We're not trying to take people's houses away from them, giving them $1,000 a day tickets for a $50,000 house. We're not in the real estate business. But the truth of the matter is we're also not in the blight business. When things are broken, they need to be fixed. When people refuse to fix them, they need to be held to action. Otherwise, take down the stop signs, turn off the red lights, and let's just have complete anarchy in our city. So, you guys, you need to move this thing forward. Start with animal, but don't wait too long to continue to do the rest, because it's a good program, and it'll benefit our city in the long run. Not as a revenue generator, but as an expense saver by keeping the people doing the work we need them to do where we need them. Thank you very much, and I apologize for being outside.
Thank you.
I'm Cindy Cleghorn from Sunland Tahunga Neighborhood Council, and I just want to reaffirm Sunland Tahunga's support for the ACE program. We have seen, we're really anxious to see the animal services step move forward, because then it's a stepping stone, hopefully, to move on to building and safety. We have a number of properties in our community that are not taken care of by their owners. The ACE program would be an ideal situation for getting that into compliance. So we're very anxious to take this step, and we urge your support of it to move forward with the animal services area. Let's see how it works, and let's also how quickly can you review this with Animal Services within a few months so that we can take it to the next step, moving on with some of the other departments. So just want to reemphasize again Sunland Tahunga's strong support for the ACE program, and look forward to moving it on. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Jacob Miller. Work with the Department of Animal Services for the last 11 years. I'm an animal care technician. While I'm not an animal control officer going out in the field, seeing a lot of this stuff out on the street, I can definitely tell you, just as a resident myself, that the ACE program would definitely be a good thing for animal services. Mainly because when you look at when we are able to actually put some teeth in the enforcement of the rules and the laws and the regulations in Los Angeles, it changes behavior. If you look at the Spay Neuter ordinance for dogs, what you'll notice when you come to the shelters is during the puppy and kitten season, Unweaned puppies coming through the door is practically a flat line these days. We hardly get any in. Of course, we're still getting a lot of cats in because there's not a lot you can do to control that. But one thing is for sure, that because people now are having to purchase a license and they see the clear difference between the two different types of licensing, they're changing their behaviors. And I think by having an ACE program out there, by having some teeth to the enforcement, by people actually getting something that says, this is what you have to do, and this is what you have to pay us because you were not in compliance, they're going to think about that the next time. It has a very good effect, and it also has a very good effect just in the future of things. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Phyllis Doherty. The real way to save lives of animals is administrative program, because this is what keeps them from getting into the shelter, which is what we want to do. We want to start working at the source of the problem. The rescue and the adoptions are all wonderful, and they make the people feel great, but it's not good for the animals, because in order to get to that point, they had to be put in the shelter. And often that's because the person that got them did not believe they had to comply with the laws. They let the animal get out of control. They let the care of the animal get out of control. And then what's the next step? They dump it in the shelter. So if we want to keep animals out of the shelter, this is the way to start. Give our officers a chance to issue something that's like a parking ticket. You don't get rid of it. Even if you get rid of the animal, you're still going to have to pay it. Across the country, there's not a lot of trouble enforcing these. At $100 a piece, which is what they should be, it's enough to make people comply. At the same time, they're not going to get rid of the animal if they want to keep it. If they don't want to keep it, then we shouldn't be allowing it to suffer in their yard. You need to demand a report back on this in no more than 60 days, because Ms. Barnett's answer to me the other day was that they are forming a committee. And when I asked who was on the committee, she wasn't really sure, but certainly there was no one with any law enforcement background. Law enforcement is an attitude, as you know. It's not something that you can do in administration. We have officers. We have 2 officers that would be perfect, one for field and one for the wording of the administrative citations. They need to be assigned, and we need to get going with this. You cannot reach out to the public and form a committee and think that you're going to form a law enforcement program that will work. They need to write the wording of these citations. I don't think she knows where to start. You've got to start the way you would with any law and work through the entire code section and get out there and start doing it, not forming a committee. So please check back on it. We can't rely on charities to help us with this aspect of it, because they make their money, unfortunately, and their donations on there being animals that are suffering. We need to stop it.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker card we have, Joanne Garb. Hello.
Hi. Joanne Yavanek Garb, West Hills Neighborhood Council and Southwest Valley Neighborhood Council Budget Advocate. We as the Budget Advocates are very much in favor of the ACE program, particularly with animal services and with 1 or 2 other departments starting as a pilot program within the city. I don't think it's anything that you have to go out and draft. It's something other cities are doing, so you don't really have to reinvent the wheel. You could see what other cities are doing and how successful they are, and many of them are extremely successful. I have a problem with the animal control with just how many dogs and cats are out there, and I think by giving them an administrative citation, it would be much easier than criminalizing people, because people will tend to run away from criminalization, but they will stick with an administration program. That's pretty much all I have to say. I'm just so much in favor of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joanne, just you suggested that it's not something we necessarily have to draft, but that's actually what we've been doing, which is great. Is going through different reiterations of the ordinance, and the more detail we put to it, in fact, the more questions it's raised, and then they come back with more solutions. In fact, though, there's, I think, a few more that we'll hear today, but it's getting closer, and which is good. So I think things are moving in the right direction.
We need to get it in as soon as possible.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you to all the speakers, in fact, that took the opportunity to come down today and weigh in your opinions, and particularly those of your boards you're representing. It's very important to get that on the public record, so we all appreciate it. I know, speaking on behalf of all my colleagues here, we truly appreciate it. Thank you very much. If we can have City Attorney's Office come up as well, please. And in fact, if those of you who want to see the draft, I think Bill can barely carry it under one arm now. There's a draft.
Just my email.
So that's just the emails on the draft. Wow. Good afternoon.
How are you?
How you doing, Chief? All right, so if you could give us just an update on, I know in the last hearing that we had on this, there were several recommendations and changes to come back. I believe it was the March 22nd hearing, and then there are many changes in many of the different hearings that we've had as well, that in definitions and process and policy, and in fact in fine structures as well. So if you can just sort of walk through to the committee where we're at.
So if I may, the two latest drafts differ. I'll start with the differences in the two latest drafts. The difference in the most recent draft is that it adds the Animal Services Department as one of two departments, along with the Police Department, to launch the ACE program at the outset with those two departments, as opposed to the prior draft, the third draft, which started with Police Department and then would be followed with the Housing, Animal Services, licensing regulations only, and then Building and Safety Department. That's the main difference between the two. And I know there's some questions about the provisions as they relate to the Building and Safety, the Animal Services Department and how it's added in this fourth draft. But if I may focus on the third draft for a moment, that draft clarified and added language that made it even clearer that this is a pilot program. It's to be implemented only in phases, and the council will decide whether the next phase is implemented or not, or whether the program is ended at any point in time. That is made manifestly clear. In addition to that, all of the funds that are received will go into the fund that is established and is controlled by council. It's a general fund, with the exception being the few instances where a refund is made to a person for a fine that has to be posted when they appeal, when they challenge the administrative citation. If the ruling goes in their favor, then they get their money back. So that's held in a fund that is temporary until the ruling is made by the administrative hearing officer. Those are the main salient features. There is one other aspect that was discussed at length in committee, and that is whether or not subpoenas would be included. The subpoenas would be issued only by the administrative hearing officer, only upon the request of the person who receives the citation, and not at the request of the the city attorney's office, but at the request of the person who receives the citation or the enforcing department. That's a provision that has been controversial. If the committee wishes to recommend its deletion, we're prepared to redraft the ordinance so that it can be deleted. Those are the main aspects of it. There was also discussion about the qualifications for the hearing officers and hearing examiners. We've added some references to state law for judges pro tem and for other independent fact finders who have received at least 25 hours of training for this type of a role, and those have been included in the definition as well. With respect to the Animal Services Department being added in the fourth version, it was added, I believe, and I'm sorry I was not present at the Paul Committee meeting where this was discussed, but I did listen to the tape very closely. There was one area where there was some lack of clarity for me in any event, maybe not in the minds of the committee members and of those who were present, and that was with respect to the amount of the penalties that would be imposed. The department recommended, I think, starting at $100 and then building up for the second and third offense. The ACE ordinance is drafted. It starts at $250, and it wasn't clear to me when the committee recommended that the recommendations of the department should just be to include animal services just be folded into the ACE program, whether the recommendation was being made to also change the penalties, and if so, whether that would apply only to violations of animal services sections of the code or for all violations. So that's something that if we add animal services, we would just need some clarification. It is possible, I may add, to add the $100 level for the first violation of an animal service type violation only, and for all other violations to keep it the $250 and $500 and $1,000. So however the committee chooses to go, we're prepared to draft that as well.
Is there a menu option on that?
I'm sorry?
Is there a menu option on that right now?
There's not really. The limitation on it, and I may misstate this, but my understanding is that if a violation is an infraction, we are limited to the maximum amount that may be imposed for the infraction in any event. So we would have to probably go through and revise some of those infractions that now may provide for a $50 penalty, even if it's made $100. That can be the subject of a separate ordinance. There's no problem in doing that through a separate ordinance. That issue doesn't arise with respect to misdemeanors. We can provide whatever the penalty is under ACE, regardless of the misdemeanor penalty.
Thank you. Colleagues?
Well, first of all, in answer to that question, it seemed like the consensus was that for an animal services violation, the first penalty should be $100. So I wonder if you can just clarify that with a minimal amount of difficulty.
Yes.
In the case of animal services violations, we just add the step at $100 first, but otherwise the ordinance would be unaffected. This ordinance has had a long history of revisions and discussions and rewritings to get to this point, and I want to thank the City Attorney's Office, along with the LAPD and Animal Services, for all your effort and cooperation. This is really intended as a tool, just one of the tools in our toolbox to help us enforce the laws that are already on the books. I think right now, partly because of our financial shortfall, a number of the issues that we'd like to deal with in enforcement are forgotten or missed because we don't have the easy ability to do it. I think this will correct it. And it is a pilot program, and we're starting with a couple areas where the citations themselves I don't think are of any great controversy. They are things that the community all agrees should be cited and should be enforced, and this is a relatively easy and simple and practical way to do it. So I hope we move this pilot program forward, and that with other similar initiatives like the recommendations of the Corps Commission and the creation of our Inspector General and other things, we get the city on continuing to be more and more on track and more efficient in the things that need to be done.
Well, I have to smile because to see my friends in the animal world, which I'm part of, say something positive and feel good that this is a step in the right direction is a significant new moment. And I'm very proud of their ability to get up and say that and admit that these are efforts that will make a lot of sense. And so I just want to thank them for coming out, and I want to thank the general manager for working with folks on it, and I support this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want Los Angeles to be a fine city, not a fine city. And I want to ask you a tough question. One of the things that I'm most passionate about is clean streets, okay? And now we give tickets for people who get park in the street, but the money doesn't go to the street cleaning, it goes to the general fund. So if I'm so passionate about clean streets, I'm going to take you on, Mr. Carter, and I'm going to say I want every dime that goes to street cleaning for a street cleaning citation have to go back into street cleaning. Because what you have here is I always think it's important to go to the general fund because then it's like going to the daddy and mommy and they decide how it's spread up. I just think I could come back and challenge you if you're setting this aside to a department. Is that what you're doing here?
No, if I may, and I'll let Mr. Carter answer for himself, obviously, but if I may, the revenue comes into the general fund for a reason, and that is that...
Got it, but on all this here, all it goes to general fund, right? Everything's going to general fund?
Absolutely.
I heard something else, sir.
These are not special fees imposed for particular services. This is really to obtain compliance of the city's laws and regulations.
Right.
And so it goes, as a general proposition, it goes into the general fund. However, annually, there's a special fund established for this purpose, and the revenues in that fund can be tracked in that fund, and the CAO can give you a recommendation every year when they present the budget to you.
So it goes to the general fund.
To that fund and say,
So Ray's in charge of that.
correct.
So I misunderstood you.
What
I
I'm saying is-
misunderstood, though, because I thought when you said the special fund, I didn't want something to go to a special fund. I think if it goes to the CAO, and then they're able to determine the fairness for
Correct.
all the city's needs.
And the council is in charge of that, and you can then allocate it to whatever
And
department
the
you
first
deem
thing is
appropriate.
going to be a warning on this?
No?
No.
Why not, Mr. Carter? If we haven't enforced the law, I think there
Well,
should be some warning for the first ticket.
Well, right, if
Give
I
me
may.
one ticket, just give me a ticket.
Bill Carter, City Attorney's Office. And I want to thank the committee and Councilman Koretz and others, and even former Councilman Smith, who I know in my first appearance before the committee, he mentioned that he had an idea about whether he called it ACE or something like ACE many years ago. And I know we've had recently, I know our office has been talking to Councilmember Englander about that, and it's a good idea. This was an idea that has been kicked around for many years and implemented in many cities throughout the region. And I know it's a program that is very effective in those cities. In our city, just to put things in perspective, last year we handled about 25,000 cases, 25,000 citation or infraction type cases that could have gone through ACE. To put that in perspective, these are cases that our prosecutors had to look at or the courts had to look at. So there's an awful lot of cases that go through our office. Now, these are already crimes.
I got it. How many tickets did we give last year for littering?
Oh, I could probably get you that number, probably
I think it's
2 or
under
3.
10.
I don't know. I
I want you to find out for me before we come to council.
currently, they're
I got it.
they're all crimes. They're all crimes.
I understand, but if we haven't enforced something, I think in fairness, it's just like, does everybody stop at a stop sign on a two-wheel vehicle?
No.
Okay, so all of a sudden, we're going to start enforcing that? I think we should let the word out so that people know when we're enforcing this. I think there should be some public campaign. You're shaking your head?
If I may, Councilman, these are already crimes, and what we're doing is we're giving people an opportunity not to be criminals.
Are these
They
grade A
not
crimes?
citations.
These
Me?
are the felony crimes?
These are misdemeanors and infractions. They're already crimes.
Anyway, my recommendation, a friendly amendment, that the first citations, as we roll this out, you're given a warning. If we haven't enforced it for a long time, which we haven't, I think you should be fair.
Well, if I may, with respect to your special fund, there's 2 funds that are created. One is what we call the Code Compliance Fund. So any fees or fines go into that fund. The second fund, the special fund that Mr. Echeverria was talking about, it's just like when you have a ticket, you have to pay your bail if you're going to go challenge the bail. Well, if you're going to challenge the citation, you post your deposit, it goes into that special fund. If you win, you get your money back. So we have to hold that money separately and can't commingle it. If you lose, that money goes into the general fund.
But I also, add another point, Mr. Carter, there should be a place, a physical office in the valley, as well as in the south side and the west side or the harbor where people could go to contest their tickets. If we make them drive all the way downtown, I think that's not only unfair and unfinable, or whatever the word I was using, I just think it's not the way a big city should serve its people. That's why you have regional city halls.
Let me point out.
It could be by a weekly basis, on a Tuesday at the Hollywood
Well,
City
they'd be
Hall or
challenged
whatever.
First, initially, the way the ordinance is written, the first challenge goes to the city attorney's office, and the city attorney does an initial review. That initial review could be done in any number of our offices in the valley, in
Very
the
well,
port,
you answered the
on the
question.
west side.
Thank you so much.
The final review would be done by an administrative law judge.
And with respect to your overall concern, though, if this is what is referred to as an ongoing violation, one that can't be remedied immediately, the ordinance provides for notice to be given to the person who's committing the violation and sufficient time to correct it. And if in fact it's corrected within that sufficient time, then there's no fine collected or no penalty collected for the violation. So there is that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are also joined by the chair, who is sitting second chair now for the balance of this particular item. Mr. Krikorian, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and finish off item 4 and 5 and turn the gavel back over. But before we do, on 4 and 5, if I could, just capturing what was stated in the questions that were asked by my colleagues, and I want to also reiterate all the fine work that's been done by the City Attorney's Office. And you're right, Mr. Carter, this was an issue that was first brought forward, I recall, in Mr. Smith's first year of his first term, where he was looking to try to crack down on, or at least fix, or come up with a better process and system in place for some of the local violations that we just, quite frankly, don't have time for in terms of dealing with building and safety or different departments having different components of it, and a lot of it being just quality of life issues. And as we see Ms. Papa here representing Los Angeles Police Department, I know full well, and I've heard it too many times, but never enough, that we have to share those words with the community, that it's that broken window theory, that if we don't fix those violations quickly in the neighborhood, that neighborhood starts to attract additional crime, that neighborhood starts to fall apart and attract additional graffiti and vandalism, and then that brings additional drugs and all kinds of other issues, as we see one of our former senior lead officers, Donnie Graham, in the audience here, who used to go door to door cracking these things, these type of cases and solving those problems until he earned additional stripes. He's got all these hash marks up and down his arm now. But so this is a good thing to move forward, but there are still a couple things I know that we'd like to hear back from. One is that we'd ask then the city attorney to clarify the intent and the limitations on the use of the subpoena powers as you'd stated. Mr. Echeverria, that if we can look at that, and it says by the hearing officers, as you clarified, that if we can get that clarity in writing, that they would be the only ones having that authority. That we'd also move then to request a revised ordinance that makes the appointment of the actual hearing officers subject to confirmation by the city council as well, with concurrence of the mayor. There's some ambiguity to exactly how they would be appointed, although it does specify the types of individuals, so we'd like to see that defined a little more.
It actually, if I may, to that point, the ordinance actually provides not only for what you stated, but also for the criteria and for the appointment itself to be submitted to council, and also for the procedures that will be implemented for the hearings to be submitted to council as well. So the entire structure will come before you. The individuals don't, usually council doesn't get, except for commissioners obviously and general managers, council doesn't get into the, if you will, into the weeds, to use a common phrase, that much into the weeds in appointing particular individuals who will perform functions that are already approved by...
but that's what we'd like to see that come back in that, is that the appointment of the actual hearing officers come back as just as a commissioner would as well. And then a couple other things. How are the hearing officers actually then selected? That can be part of that structure. So if they go through any kind of formal process, in addition to just the selection type of criteria. The violation options with the definition of the limitations, particularly as it relates to animal services. I think that was, I believe, Mr. Koretz had asked for that, violation options, and it was stated that we might have some limitations as to what those violations can be in terms of actual fine structure. So if we can have that.
I'm not sure I'm understanding. Is that a reference to the $100 fine structure that we're talking about?
Yes. Yeah, so if we can define that.
That can be, yeah.
Okay. If we can come back with an explanation per Mr. Labange on the funds and where they go, or the historic reference on where funds go and why they would either go into the general fund or back to sweeping Mr. Labange's street, as the analogy.
I got that. But the more important one is they're going to be aware, if we're not enforcing stuff, I would give people a warning first off.
Right.
And have a big PR campaign.
Mr. Chair, if that's a friendly amendment, I am friendly with the amender, but I'm not friendly towards the amendment itself, so I wouldn't accept that. I think that most of these violations are well known to individuals as violations. Just the fact that we haven't done a great job of enforcing doesn't really get them off the hook. These are not all truly minor violations. I think some of them are pretty damn important, and people know they're violating it. They kind of hope they get away with it, but I don't think that's really good excuse. I think we should be enforcing immediately. There is discretion, so if it seems that it's not necessary to enforce or to put in a penalty, there is discretion not to do that. There's also discretion to bypass this whole process and go for a more aggressive prosecution as well.
So let me
It's
ask
just a tool, but I think, I really don't want to see everyone just get a blanket off the hook.
Fair enough. And so with that, is there an ability to enforce with the spirit of the law versus letter of the law on this?
If I understand the question correctly, maybe this will answer it. I mean, sometimes a police officer pulls you over and lets you off with a warning.
That's right. That's the
You're
spirit of the
asking
law
whether
versus letter of the
The
law.
enforcement officers would have that discretion. I believe they would.
Can we have that defined in the ordinance as well? Would that be?
No more than it is for the LAPD, no.
Okay. And then in other words, we wouldn't require that
Correct.
to be defined.
Correct.
Okay. It's implied.
Correct.
Got it. And then in the last recommendation, if you can come back with any suggestions on hearings and if they can be regionalized or localized as well, as I believe that was the last request, Mr. LeBon's, just to see if some of those hearings can be done and scheduled regionally as Mr. LeBon has suggested. If those can be done.
I'm looking puzzled because normally that's something that's done administratively. It's not part of the ordinance.
It doesn't need to be, but
Yeah.
just something in writing for the committee to talk about how that can be done.
Sure.
That would be great.
Absolutely.
I just have a clarification. Following the fine gentleman from the 5th District, does that mean I have no friends here?
You have nothing but friends.
Oh.
It's your amendment that doesn't have friends.
I thought I made that clear, that we have a friendly amender, but just not a friendly amendment.
All right, we'll figure it out.
Okay. So with that, if we can
Chair,
have
if I
that.
could make one more request. Is there any chance that these changes could be heard at council instead of back at committee? Because this has gone back and forth for many years, and it would be great to actually find some way to move it towards fruition.
I don't accept that as a friendly, but I would say that we're close. We're very, very close. I think if we get those final items in writing, we should be able to get there pretty quickly.
Or at least if there's some way to bring that back in an expeditious fashion.
Well, if I may, I think that I'd like to see those brought back. If they are brought back and in conformity with what we've talked about, then I'd be happy to waive it out of committee so that they can go directly to council and we can
That would be
expedite
great.
matters, because this has been going on for a long time, and I think it's time we get down to business and get rolling.
And these weren't major. I won't put them on the list of major issues. So if we can get that back, and then that'll give us the opportunity to at least review those, and it'll give the opportunity for the city attorney's office as well to take the time to do them and not rush them while it's pushed onto a council agenda. But then, as we've just heard from our chairman of the committee, he'd be willing to waive it if they met all of those objectives. That'd be great, and I think everybody needs to applaud themselves on this. It's been a long time in the works. Yes, Steve?
Just a clarification, there's no specific mention been made of it, but I'm assuming that I'm correct in concluding that the Animal Services Department will be one of the two departments implementing this immediately. That is the desire of the committee, as PAW recommended.
From my understanding, that is
Okay.
what's coming out of the recommendation.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
If I may, Robert Lee, Office of Finance. We support this format and the ordinance, and it's been going on for a while, and we agree. However, from the Office of Finance viewpoint, we have a concern regarding how we will implement the funds going into the general fund, or this new fund that's being created. And the primary focus is the fact that the Office of Finance, at this point, does not have the infrastructure regarding the collection of citations. I mean, we are in regards to business tax, the annual business tax, the renewals, whatnot. We have the infrastructure for that, but in regards to citations, in regards to fines, we have no knowledge of that. Not only that, our supporting staff have no historical knowledge of these things.
Can we ask for a memo back from the Office of Finance
Sure.
detailing all the concerns, that we
Yes,
can address
please.
those, and that, if that can come back to this committee as well at the same time. That
Yes.
might be something we have to look at, and that might require a couple quick tweaks or fixes or tools or resources that we can give you to accomplish that.
Because we would not be doing our job if we not.
And we don't want to see this pilot program fail, and this is where, if you don't have the infrastructure in place on the backside, the technology in place on the backside, or the personnel in place on the backside to support the administrative function of this and the technological and financial structure of it,
Yes.
then it's great to have the resources out there in one department going out there to issue the violations. But then if you have nothing and no support staff on the back end, then we're in trouble. And then it falls apart and everybody says the program didn't work. And none of us want that to happen.
And
So-
that's one of the foundations we would like to build, because each of these individuals, like Animal Services, has the foundation, has the knowledge. If somebody called us about a dog going loose in the field, we might be able to figure out how to collect it, but we wouldn't know how to answer the question.
If you can articulate that in an official memorandum back to this committee.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my time in the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I
Thank you.
excuse myself from district manager?
Thank you very much, Mr. Englander, for your great efficiency in leading the committee in my absence. You're setting a standard that I don't expect to be able to maintain, so thank you. And I just wanted to welcome Mr. Labange. You're among friends, Mr. Labange, I want to assure you, but I'm delighted that you'll be joining us on Budget and Finance, and thank you very much for your willingness to serve in this capacity. All right, thank you, Mr. Labange. All right, and Mr. Englander, thank you again. You've covered the majority of the agenda, I see. I think we are coming to item 10.
10, yes, that is correct. Item 10 is a motion corrects Alarcon relative to proposed funding and position authority for animal care technician positions in the Department of Animal Services for the remainder of this fiscal year and in the proposed fiscal year 2013-14 budget.
All right, well, we have, this is a matter that's already been heard by the Pause Committee, so let's go ahead and, we have 3 cards on the item. Why don't we hear the cards first, and then we'll go ahead and hear the report from staff. The first card is Jacob Miller, followed by Phyllis Doherty, followed by James Johnson.
Jacob Miller, Department of Animal Services, 11 years as an animal care technician. I'm very pleased that we have come to getting a motion like this finally in front of the Budget and Finance Committee and just finally out in the open. I think Animal Services has gone for too long with having an ever-reduced budget ever since the financial crisis has hit Los Angeles. And while all the departments have shared in the sacrifice, the motion pretty much says it very clear that Animal Services is probably the most dangerously underfunded department in Los Angeles. Now, we are treading water, and we continue to tread water, and no matter what, the staff is committed to making sure that we keep a humane Los Angeles. But the 16 animal care technicians that we seek to gain from this motion would definitely go a million miles to improve the care, increase adoptions, decrease euthanasia. I think it would just be a good thing all around. And I just want to thank you very much for hearing this motion and bringing it this far. And we really hope, all the animal care technicians for Los Angeles really hope that we can get some more help very soon, and we can better serve Los Angeles and hold up to our obligations for that Bond F measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Phyllis Doherty, followed by James Johnson. And that's all the cards that I have on this matter so far.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Phyllis Doherty, and with Animal Issues Movement, something I don't mention often, so I'm a very long-time member of California Animal Control Directors Association and the State Humane Association of California, as well as other organizations that deal with the administration of animal control. So I'm very, very familiar with what they're doing all across the country, what works and what doesn't work. The elimination of workers at night at shelters does not work for anyone. And although you received a chart that said that no one had animal control or animal care technicians at night, that's not true. I'm familiar with the shelters that were on that list. They all, if they do not have animal care technicians, they at least have one officer on duty all the time. Officers have usually come up through the kennel side. They understand when there's an emergency. And many of them also have a dispatcher on duty at the same time. So you still have one or two employees there, even if it's not an animal care technician. And I'm sorry that that was misinformation that was given to you and to the public, because the better thing would have been to come into you and actually show you on a chart how many animals there are, how few people, and how they need more employees to help. Then we would have gotten to here without all of this bad publicity in the newspaper. And also we're paying Ms. Barnett $203,000 a year to manage. A manager does not panic, does not manage by panic. You manage by taking the problem in first and trying to find a solution and being part of that. So we want to thank Mr. Koretz and Mr. Alacon for definitely being part of that solution the other day and realizing that we are very close to being in violation of animal cruelty laws. You will be if you take these animal care technicians out at night, because the things that happens to animals at night when they fight, when they get caught in the cages, in the sides of the kennels, is cruel. So I know you will do the right thing, and we must find the money to give these extra employees to this department.
Thank you. Our final speaker is James Johnson. Mr. Johnson, welcome.
Good afternoon, Brother Chair. I call you brother. And members of the committee, James Johnson, SAU Local 721. I simply wanted to come up and say thanks, in particular to Councilmember Koretz and his staff for dealing with this issue head on. I was a little bit perturbed how this thing went down, but at the end of the day, folks who know what to do came to the table and fought to figure out a way to deal with the issue, and therefore the motion that the committee has before them. So on behalf of President Schoonover, I simply wanted to say thanks to the council member for the CL's office and those that really took this issue to heart and tried to find a solution. Ultimately, some of the things that we want to do within the department is really look at some of the things that work in some of the other departments as it relates to better employee labor relations, joint labor management committees, particularly in the Department of Sanitation, is arguably one of the best joint labor management committees in the city, if not in the state, and that's something that we really need to look at. And so while this is great, there's still some work to do, and Local 721 is always prepared to step up and help wherever we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz, in that this is your motion and it came from the committee that you chair, would you like to offer some introductory comments?
Sure. And this basically was a different solution among a number of potential difficult choices. The department, I think, is one of the ones in the city, maybe the only one, that has literally crossed the line and is so underfunded that it just can't function in the way it's intended. When you look at the numbers, the fact that 7 or 8 years ago we had responsibility for a little over 700 kennels and we had 120 ACTs, and now we have over 2,000 kennels and just 14 more ACTs with, I believe, 6 to join them. It's very clear there just aren't enough people to do the job properly and safely. So one proposal was to eliminate the graveyard shift. For a number of reasons, that certainly had a lot of controversy and some potential harm to the animals. We didn't look at it intensely because of all of the concerns, both Ms. Barnett, the general manager, and members of the committee all just said, we need to find a better way, and what we really should do is just address the fact that head on there isn't enough staffing. And the real solution is, this is one of those departments with a relatively modest budget, and a change that wouldn't mean much in a larger department would be enough funding to add 16 ACTs and actually run the department at a level that it can still pretty much barely do the job, but can do the job properly. Ms. Barnett told us that most of that funding is available in this year's budget, and we have heard from the mayor's office that essentially that same funding could be put into next year's budget. I think the current conversation is 12 ACTs and some security officers, which are really leftovers from the graveyard shift proposal. So if that was tweaked, the money would be there for the 16 ACTs this year and next year, and it's a relatively modest amount of money, but it would guarantee more safety and an appropriate level of operation for the department and for the animals that it protects.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Barnett, would you mind coming to the table? And Mr. Rosendahl, did you want to?
Yeah, I just, and I really look forward to Ms. Barnett speaking, but what my problem is, there's no estimate is provided for the cost of these positions for the remainder of the fiscal year, nor is there a funding source identified. I mean, those are practical issues. I don't disagree with the notion of making something happen, but I'd like to see if we can do it.
So I suppose the first question, and welcome your general comments about this issue, but if you might, from the outset, address whether for the remainder of this fiscal year, these resolution authorities are absorbable within your existing budget, number one, and then number two, if you can address the issue of ongoing funding for for these positions next year. We certainly wouldn't want to include temporary positions until July 1st, which we couldn't then sustain in the budget the following year and run the risk of having to lay people off that we just brought on under resolution authority. So if you could address those concerns first.
Sure, and we agree. Brenda Barnett, General Manager, Los Angeles Animal Services. So I asked John Forland to join me because he's been crunching the numbers for us for days now, and we do believe very strongly that we can absorb the cost this year. I believe we've even found that $60,000 that we thought we were short to absorb for this year, and the cost for next year is $975,000.
So we did look at our salaries general account this year, and with the most optimistic hiring schedule possible. It's possible we would have a slight shortfall, $60,000 or $70,000 in there. We've been monitoring our expense accounts. If we were able to follow that very optimistic hiring schedule, we believe we clearly will have balances in our expense accounts that could be made available for our salaries account. So even in that case, we would be able to cover any cash shortfall this year.
Great. So under your most conservative estimates, you would expect that all of these 16 authorities would be absorbable within the current fiscal year budget?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Anything else you'd like to add on this? Because I think, I first of all want to applaud Mr. Kretz and his leadership in addressing this, and also the department in trying to find a solution. I know that the option of locking up shelters at night, without personnel is not an option that anybody savors or thinks is something that would be a positive policy step. But living within the realities of the budget that we have, I just want to say that, I very much appreciate Mr. Kretz's effort to address this urgent situation and the department's working to find that within the existing budget to be able to enable us to do this. So I'm very much supportive of this. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this?
I think we've covered it, and I do think that the redeployment of the graveyard shift was simply a last-ditch effort to try to cover the hours that we need during the day to provide the animals and the public with service and with services that they deserve. So through conversations with Councilmember Koretz and Councilmember Alarcon, we just said, we're just going to have to find another way to do it, and that's going to be to hire the people we need.
And so with this motion, with the approval of this motion, then just for the sake of clarity, there will be no need to eliminate those personnel that work in the shelters overnight, we will be able to continue to have staffing in the shelters through on a
Correct,
24-hour
correct, yes. And part of this came around with the opening of the new South LA shelter, when we added 100 new animal spaces over what the staff at the old South LA had been taking care of. So suddenly we were in a sort of an upside-down position with staffing that, although I think our staff have been working incredibly hard and treading water for a long time, this extra burden just made it almost impossible.
All right, very good. Members, anything further?
Council member, if I may, Janice Chang, Yu, Office of the CAO. One of your questions was whether there's enough funding in the next fiscal year to cover the cost of the positions. The department, while it may be able to absorb the costs for the rest of the fiscal year this year, there will be additional funding that will be needed to above the budget threshold this year for the department in next year's budget to be able to cover the cost of the 16 positions.
Does that take into effect the mayor's recommendation for 12 positions and security?
The mayor's budget is being worked on at this point, and they, everyone is aware of the requests from the council.
Obviously, there is no commitment to do anything until the mayor's budget is released.
Correct.
But I think it's sort of everyone's understanding that this is an important priority, and I would hope and expect that we would see funding for those positions in the coming year's budget as well. So, anything further? Mr. Neuter? Mr. Roosevelt, anything further?
I'm very pleased. And I want to thank everybody in the room for making this happen. It's a great event.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, well, it sounds like then without objection, it will be the unanimous action of the committee to approve the motion. Good job, Paul. Just taking one step back a moment, I'm not sure if the record was clear when we closed out items 4 and 5, but we did want to note and file a report on number 5 as well. I think that was part of what we had said, but just for the sake of the record, that is also the action of the committee. And that brings us to item number 11. Sorry,
Actually, that went on consent, so actually we're going back to item 1 for the closed session.
Very good. All right, then the committee will now retire to closed session. So if you're not here on item number 1, if you would please be so kind as to step out. Please. All right. The committee is back now in open session, and there being no other business before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you guys very much.
Yes. Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.